Okay, so we're actually going to examine a poem, and you have at your tables two poems by Robert Frost, sometimes very accessible, sometimes not so much. The first one we're going to look at is Fire and Ice. And Fire and Ice is the apocalyptic poem that was paired with Is This the End? That was the poetry pairing for the New York Times article that we just read. So if you are in lower grades, but you want to have this kind of discussion, you could put up that photograph of the Statue of Liberty underwater and begin your discussion there. And you could pass out this Robert Frost poem that in readability index is somewhere between 2nd and 5th grade. But we could probably chew on it for a couple of hours at least. You could also play that poem, It's the End of the World as we Know It, right? And talk about that meme, that schema. So if you would please just take a look at Fire and Ice by Robert Frost. And I always tell my students when we read poetry, we read from punctuation mark to punctuation mark. And so is there anyone who would like to volunteer to read this short little one-stanza poem? Thanks.
So Fire and Ice by Robert Frost. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction ice is also great and would suffice.
Okay, pretty simple. There's some vocabulary that you might have to get into with your students, but for the most part, he's saying that the world can end in one of two ways, fire and ice. And what does he base his assumption on? What have been the two great apocalyptic things that have led to collapse of civilizations?
The Ice Age.
The Ice Age,
The dinosaurs.
War.
volcanoes, yeah. It could be war. Fire could be war. Fire could be war. So this is a very interesting poem. What's it leaving out? What? It's leaving out flood, although there are some that say ice.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's definitely leaving out flood. What else is it leaving out? Disease. Destruction. Self-destruction, yeah.
Well, I don't think they're leaving anything out purposely because they're using the polar opposites of each other.
Yes.
So there's no point to stick up at middle stuff because we're talking about the absolute two opposing forces.
Yes. And that's what poetry must do because of its size. And so he is employing fire, which stands for this subset of things, and ice, that stands for this subset of things. And that is completely appropriate for a poem because it's a poem, it's Robert Frost, it's his choice how he wants to envision how the world might end. But what's interesting is that we have a conversation going on right now about global warming with people saying, how can it be global warming? We just had the coldest winter on record. We just had a huge flood. It was freezing in here. And so what you could do is you could begin a conversation about how this presents perhaps, and of course it's his choice, but in the world it presents a false dichotomy. Because, like you said, he's relying on our understanding of polar opposites. But what we understand about the real world is it's more subtle than that. And that by our thinking in polar opposites, we are leaving out the nuances and the subtlety. Bo Bergdahl is a traitor. Bo Bergdahl is a misunderstood young man. Well, there's lots of motivations that are unexamined between those two. who was the Snowden. Snowden is a traitor. Snowden is a whistleblower. Well, we know, if we're familiar with literature at all, is we understand the complexity of emotions and motivations. And our hackles kind of go up when people start constructing the world into dichotomies, polar opposites. And so what's interesting about this poem is that you can talk about, well, in what way does our current global warming experience, which now we've taken to call global change, global climate change, to avoid that very argument, well, it was cold as hell that would have to be Dante's poem. It was really cold this winter, and therefore there is no global climate change, or there is no global warming. We gave, just by the way we named it, or scientists named it, they gave people an opportunity to close their minds down on the complexity of the situation. And they were able to confuse climate and weather. And so how we name things, and then the metaphors that we use, and the stories, the narratives, they structure our thinking in a certain way. And so you could certainly use this poem to open up a conversation about the complexity of global warming, global climate change. Okay, are we on to the road not taken? Okay, the road not taken. How many of you are familiar with this poem? Right. Great. Here are a couple of popular visualizations of that. This is the road less traveled, and this is the easy way. And then I even saw it at Whole Foods the other night. I couldn't believe it. It says, choose the road less traveled. So when you think of this poem, what do you think of? What do you think of? What is its message? Challenge? Yeah.
Individuality.
Decisions. Uncertainty. And the final line, I chose the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. How often have you seen that? Graduation speeches, words of advice, choose the road less traveled, right? Go your own way. It makes all the difference in the world. So it's often used as a poem to say, stay away from conformity. Does that match your understanding of the poem? Mm-hmm. Stay away from conformity. Go on your own path. Yeah. Well, let's read that poem now to ourselves. Is that really what it says? Written by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So, are the roads different?
It says no until the very end. It says there was one less traveled by.
Well, he says the roads were really just about the same. They were both equally worn, and they were equal. And then the last stanza, he changes tense. I shall be telling this with a sigh, To whom? We don't know, but he will be telling this story of a moment in his life, somewhere ages and ages hence. And this is what he's going to say. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. In the future,
Or at least he hopes he can say that.
in the future, he will say, there was a moment in my life when there was a decision, and I took the one less traveled by. But this person, this Robert Frost right now, knows that that's not true. And what we do with history is we take random events and we superimpose a structure on them, and then we tell ourselves that that was the story. So this poem, which is often used to demonstrate the idea of striking out on your own, which is at least pretty familiar meme to us, really doesn't say that at all. We've got a very different Robert Frost here, who says something original about human nature. History is a series of random events, and we impose a metaphor. Here's our metaphor. But he says, really, it's a human construct. It's a human construct. And we superimpose our stories on our past. Let's be aware of the metaphors that we are using, because they may not be true. They may be shortcuts to, what was the word that we were, the not paying attention to things? Yeah, they may be shortcuts to unwitting acceptance of somebody else's.
Willed ignorance.
Yeah, yeah. So that's really, this is a good poem to use with your students to explore the metaphors and maybe explode them. Not that going your own way is not a really good idea and worthy of poems being written about it. But this too is a worthy idea to explore and deserves to be chewed on a little bit. So